Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm John Macri, joined, as always, by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nathan Jahnke. And Nate, it is NFL draft season officially for us as we move out of the free agency period and now get a chance to kind of fully dive into the incoming rookie class. Personally, one of my favorite aspects of the offseason. I've been looking forward to this for a while now. How about you?
I am also looking forward to it. After spending the last couple of years on the tech side of the company, I haven't been able to really dig much into the draft season leading up to the drafts. I've had to kind of do my homework after the fact, so it's been nice to spend some time on these prospects. I've started working on some player profiles that I'll be putting out in April. Spent all day yesterday on the top 5 tight ends, so that was fun to spend my day doing. But looking forward to talking rookies in general with you today.
Yeah, it'll be fun. We're going to be talking rookies a lot over the next month and a bit here as we lead into the NFL draft and a little bit after. But yeah, for this episode, since it's the first time, we're really going to kind of dive into this rookie class. We're going to kind of treat it as an introduction to this year's rookie class on offense. Basically, all the guys who, as of right now, and based on their projected draft capital, have kind of the best shot to be fantasy relevant, not just this coming season, but for dynasty purposes as well. We're going to go through the 4 positions on offense, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, break them down into tiers and give kind of a general breakdown of the players in those tiers before we actually start deep diving and ranking them next week. So again, we'll kind of treat this as kind of an introduction to the 2025 rookie class. Who are the names to know, where they might get drafted, maybe potential landing spots, and what does that mean for rookie drafts and 2025 redraft leagues as well. So Nate, let's get into it here, and we'll start with our smallest position group, the quarterbacks. I mentioned how we'd kind of break them down into tiers, but we landed on just one tier for the quarterbacks, that being the first round guys, or at least the projected first round guys, because this could certainly change on draft day. But right now we have 2 names, Cam Ward out of Miami, Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado. Both guys are expected to be top 5 picks in the NFL draft. Cam Ward is the favorite to go first overall right now. So obviously a small group of prospects that we're really interested in for fantasy purposes. And yes, they'll be more important for Superflex leagues, but as 2 potential top 5 picks, how are you kind of approaching both of these guys in rookie rankings right now?
Right now, I have them relatively low compared to other quarterback classes. Definitely not as strong as the quarterback class we had last year. They're expected to go in the top couple of picks, but part of that, I think, is also just the teams at the top need quarterbacks. We have the Titans, Browns, and Giants picking first 3. Arguably, the Steelers are the only other team that really needs a quarterback for this year. So expect 2 of them to go to those 3 teams, and we'll see where they land up. But all of them have relatively below average skill position groups. They all have at least a little bit of talent there, which is good, but still not quite what we would like to see. And then all bottom 8 in terms of pass blocking grades last season. So I don't think any of them will be going into great situations. Because of that, I think they're risky. And in general, the depth at quarterback in the league right now is decently good. Like, you can go down the quarterbacks, and if I'm waiting at quarterback, not picking one of the top 5 in redrafts, I can wait and get like the 18th and 19th best quarterbacks and still be relatively happy with my draft. So right now I have both of them outside of my top 20 in redraft. And in dynasty rookie drafts, I don't think I'll have any of them as a first round pick, kind of just depending on how the rest of the draft goes. Maybe some running backs end up in some not great situations, or wide receivers as well. But like, even in super flex leagues where you expect the quarterbacks to be higher in dynasty rookie drafts, I don't have them as my top couple picks there. And it'll really just depend where, again, everyone ends up. But a lot of teams should be pretty set at quarterback in dynasty leagues right now. So I think a lot of it will just depend on what are the needs of the teams in your league, and that'll play a large part in where they end up. So I think that's how they'll work out in most dynasty leagues this year.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you said it well there. Like, I think, just putting like a super flex lens on it, like where, because that's where these guys will be most valuable. Like, I'm with you. I'm not taking either of these guys at the 101. This is, obviously not the case every year with the rookie classes, right? But like, I know, I think Fantasy Pros consensus ranks has Cam Ward 101, but we'll get into it here soon. But I mean, I think I'm with you in that Ashton Jeanty should be 101. It's just too good to pass up there. There's no way I'm taking one of these quarterbacks ahead of him. even if my roster doesn't have like a great quarterback situation, I think there's just a ton of value in that spot right now where I don't know that these two quarterbacks necessarily have that same value. Um, you move to 102. I don't think Ward or Shador should necessarily be locked into 102 either. Like you said, I'd be fine going quarterback there. Maybe if you feel comfortable passing on Ted McMillan, I don't know that I would. Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm probably still taking McMillan at 102 and Superflex as well, and then adding in these quarterbacks to the mix. 103, 104 maybe at the earliest. So there's obviously, like you said, there's been a ton of talk about how this quarterback class, not as strong as most years, and I think that's reflected in even our PFF big board as well, where we rarely do not have a quarterback at the top of the big board. I think, in fact, the only other time that's happened since 2018 was in 2022 when Aiden Hutchinson was first. The next closest quarterback, I believe it was like Malik Willis, was number 30, right? So Ward and Sanders are not Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett levels of prospects, but they are both kind of outside the top 20 on the PFF big board. So it's not like it's a particularly close call here for Trevor either, as the top ranked prospect between quarterback and the other players. So yeah, I like you said, the main reason we're getting quarterbacks early in the NFL draft is because of the positional value and the need there for those teams. So yeah, all that to say, I think I'm fine with both of these guys. Maybe in that top 5 of super flex drafts, but not the first pick like a lot of previous years. You think about even 2023. Even who would you rather have, even in super flex dynasty right now, Bryce Young or Bijan Robinson? Right, it's not particularly close, and Genty is on that Bijan level of prospect, if not potentially better. So yeah, I'm with you with this QB class,
I
anyways.
would say like 104 is probably the earliest for me, and that's like any other
Yeah.
running back that lands on a very good spot just pushes them further down the list in Superflex and potentially some of these wide receivers too. But part of this is also just the talent that are at the other positions, which we'll talk about now. But that's also part of it is the other positions are generally stronger than other years, and the quarterbacks are generally weaker. So it's a combination of those two things that play into this.
Yeah, no, absolutely with you. But yeah, let's talk about some of those other positions now, and we'll move to the running backs where well, this will actually be our first kind of full positional preview and rankings that we do next week is the running back. So we'll cover them in more detail then. But we've broken them down into 3 tiers here for now for kind of the introduction of who they are. And we have tier 1, which is one name. Tier 2 is kind of the day 2 crew. And then tier 3 are the day 3 guys that are of most interest. But let's start with the first tier, the one name tier, the obvious name that I feel like every dynasty manager on the planet is likely aware of right now. It's Ashton Genty out of Boise State, coming in as a projected top 10 pick in this year's draft, and in a pretty loaded draft class as well, by the way, Nate. We've actually talked a little bit about Genty way back when we did our early 2025 rankings episodes, and he cracked the top 5 for you in those rankings. And honestly, I think wherever he lands in the draft, that is well within his range of outcomes for 2025, and of course beyond that. But that was a while ago. Anything changed from you with how you're viewing Genty for 2025?
I've moved him up slightly in my redraft rankings. I know I had him as a first round pick before. I believe I have him at 9th overall right now, so moved him up a spot or two. I think it was Devon Achan that I moved him up ahead of. It looks like he's going to be getting drafted even higher than we expected before. It seemed like the Cowboys were the pretty clear consensus pick of where he'd end up, but now it's either the Raiders at 6 or the Bears at 10. Doesn't even look like he will fall to the Cowboys, so I think those are both fairly good situations for him. Chicago, in particular, with all the work they've done on the offensive line, which we talked about in our free agent episode. So I think he would be an excellent fit there. And with the line, with the coaching staff, and with relatively minimal competition for touches, DeAndre Swift's still there, Roshan Johnson's still there. But if they add Genty, I think he's going to be on the field, ideally upwards of 80% of snaps. Even with the Raiders, the offensive line is okay there. And again, a team that doesn't have much competition for touches. They had a bunch of different guys last year. They did add Raheem Mostert, which I will point out when we talked about him a good month ago, and I said he'd land with the Raiders. Probably not the most fantasy relevant, but I wanted to be able to say I told you so. So now I'm saying I told you so. But with Mostert there, it's Genty and Mostert. Mostert's just going to be there whenever Genty needs a break. So again, situation where he's going to be on the field all the time and be a very big focal point of the offense. So I think he is, based on his talent and his projected playing time, should be one of those top couple running backs and perfectly capable of being the top overall running back this season.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you look at the expected draft capital right now, the consensus mock draft boards and things like that. He's like seventh overall landing spot. It could be Chicago, Las Vegas. I don't know that he falls to Dallas. Like you said, it doesn't really matter. Like, I'm with you. I think he is that kind of RB1 that we want in fantasy. And the term, generational gets thrown around a lot with prospects, but everything that Genty did in college and how he matches up to prospects of years past, like he truly fits that bill and deserves maybe that generational tag to him. Like he owns the all-time best PFF rushing grade thanks to his elite marks as a runner every year for 3 years. He started his college career by posting a 90.6 rushing grade. He then improved that to a 94.6 rushing grade in year 2, which is already an absurd mark, but then he improved that number one more time with an FBS leading 96.6 rushing grade in year 3 in 2024. The fact that he's getting top 10 projected draft capital is huge in itself, right? We've had 4 top 10 running backs since 2017: Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson. They have all been fantasy RB1s for multiple seasons in their careers, including Bijan, who's only been in the league for 2 years. Like he's been RB 11 in PPR and RB3. So we're kind of hopefully long past the years of Trent Richardson. And as much as we're, always, there's always a chance that a prospect can fail in the NFL. It can obviously happen to anyone. But if we're looking at, odds to succeed, which we will next week when maybe we do running back rankings and stuff. And then you can view that later this week in my rookie running backs model article. Genty, to me, like has as good a chance as any running back prospect to be a fixture as a fantasy RB1 for us for years to come here. So very, very excited about his potential.
Yeah, I'll add, like, in the past decade, it's probably only Saquon and Bijan Robinson that are in the conversation as the best running back prospect of the past
Mm-hmm.
decade. And we kind of glossed over this, but he's the top pick in Dynasty rookie drafts, top pick in Dynasty Superflex drafts. And I would say the gap between the first pick and the second pick is bigger this year than it's been in these past couple years.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Absolutely. I don't think there's any question about Genty being the first overall pick. And it, like you said, it's not particularly close relative to these years past. But Genty is not just a great running back prospect, but he's the best running back prospect in a class pretty loaded with great running backs. And that's why there are several others that will be in a good position to be kind of high quality fantasy starters for us potentially as soon as 2025. There's a group of prospects in this class to go day 2 of the NFL draft. Maybe one sneaks into the first round, but for the most part, we're looking at round 2 and round 3 prospects, which is typically the norm for pretty good running back draft capital. And we have a few names worth getting to know here, including Amarian Hampton out of North Carolina, Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State, Caleb Johnson from Iowa, and Cam Sketabo of Arizona State. So, Nate, 5 potential day 2 picks for us to choose from in our rookie drafts, more or less. We'll see if anyone jumps up or down on draft day, but either way, we'll have options here. So how many running backs do you think you're looking at for your like top 12 dynasty rookie rankings right now?
I would probably put all of them in my Dynasty rookie top 12. I think all of them top 75 on consensus big boards, which is fairly good. That puts them, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Omarion Hampton as a late first round pick, but puts all of them, I think, early third round at the latest for most of these guys. Maybe a chance one of them slips, but that's generally higher than we've seen running backs drafted or on big boards on previous years. First 3 are ranked significantly higher than any running back last year, higher than anyone outside of Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs the year before. So these are some of the top running back prospects that we have seen in recent seasons. Similarly, on our big board, all top 70 guys, which again is better than what we saw most of the guys last year and other recent years. And there are a lot of teams that need a running back. I was trying to kind of go through and think, okay, if a team drafted one of these running backs, would they be the first running back that I would draft in fantasy draft from their team? And I ended up with Dallas, the Giants, Washington, Chicago. New Orleans might be a little bit of a stretch, but if the Saints spent a second round pick on a running back, I think that would kind of say a lot of how they view that running back versus Alvin Kamara. So I think even the Saints could be a team where they draft a running back and they'd be a top player. And then AFC, the Patriots, Browns, Steelers, Jaguars, Titans, Broncos, Chiefs, Raiders, Chargers, all teams where, yeah, some of them you could have a little bit of an argument of would this guy be the starter immediately on the team? But if they're spending a round two or a round three pick on these guys, that's pretty significant of they're either the day one starter or there is a decent enough chance that they could be a starter at some point this season. So I think all of them should be top 12 dynasty rookie picks. And each of them that end up on a good landing spot, those are probably the top guys that I'm picking in dynasty rookie drafts. If we get one of these guys in the second round to a spot where they're clearly the day one starter, then I'm probably having them above any of the other wide receivers or tight ends or quarterbacks. So we could very well see the top 3 to 5 picks in dynasty rookie drafts being running backs, just depending on if the NFL draft views them as good as we view them. And I think the only concern is like if teams are waiting to pick them because they know they can pick a running back in a later round, then you start getting a little bit more concerned. But I was at the NFL Combine listening to all the coach and GM interviews, and there were so many of them, regardless of if they were teams that need a running back or not, that spoke to how deep this running back class is.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a great point, right? Like, especially with a really nice group here of prospects, there's a lot of potential there. And landing spot and actual draft capital will obviously be huge in giving either one of these guys, a rise or fall in kind of the consensus rankings. But I think this kind of group of five here is really where we'll see maybe a lot more changes in rankings in general, just as analysts view these guys differently and what they weigh more heavily from their profiles, because maybe like, a receiving profile of a Sketabo more than a Quinshon Judkins, for example, and think he might have a better shot to be a 3-down back, whatever the case may be. Like, I wouldn't be surprised to see a mixed order for this group. Even Omari and Hampton, I've seen him ranked outside of RB2 as well. So there will be a lot of varying opinions here, which should become a lot clearer, I think, once we get landing spots solidified for a really nice group of running back prospects. But either way, like you laid out, there's a lot of potential for them in as far as landing spots go in the NFL draft and where they can be fantasy relevant starters for us. So excited about this group for sure. And that solid group kind of continues into day three. Again, another group of guys who could maybe jump into day two, but are more probably more likely to go like fourth round or later. This is our final tier of names to cover today for running backs, and it includes Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee, Baishul Tutin of Virginia Tech, DJ Giddens at Kansas State, Devin Neal of Kansas, Ollie Gordon II of Oklahoma State, and RJ Harvey of UCF. Nate, all these guys need to be on fantasy radars. Every year, there are guys drafted outside the top 100 who find their way to fantasy relevancy one way or another. The Bucky Irvings, Chase Browns, and Chuba Hubbards of the world most recently. And that's who we'll be looking for here in 2025. So how do you think you'll be approaching the depth of this year's class at running back as we get into the third day of the NFL draft?
I think when we're talking about all the like late round draft picks and fantasy drafts, compared to a bunch of other handcuff running backs, generally we put rookies ahead of them because they have a wider range of outcomes. And I think that is very true of this class. We have all of them in the top 140 of consensus big boards, all roughly there on our big board. We have a little bit more range. Some of these guys outside the top 140, some of them still higher on our big board. So I think we could see these running backs, at least 2 or 3 of them, have pretty significant roles this season. This is kind of the higher end of these guys is where we saw Bucky Irving last year. The lower end of these guys is around where we saw Tyrone Tracy, who was a fantasy starter. Even though he wasn't the best fantasy starter out there, he did end up being this great player that was a league winner like Bucky Irving, but still having a running back who can be a serviceable starter on your fantasy team is valuable. And we will see that out of some of these guys this year. So I think this is still comparable to like some of the other top 5, top 8 running backs we see in other classes. This is just such a deep running back class that we see more of these guys being relevant. So I think in dynasty leagues, most of them will end up being second round guys, but there's always players that teams view better than the outside does, or worse. Some of it could be injury related, some of it character. There's a bunch of things that could happen. So wouldn't be at all surprised if at least one of these guys on this list becomes a day two player. So definitely we'll see some movement for these players, but in general, I wouldn't be surprised if all of them are drafted in redraft leagues and are guys that people prioritize in their rookie drafts.
Yeah, obviously anything can happen with these players where they end up in great landing spots or they impress in training camp. Injuries happen to starters. They jump up in NFL draft capital. Like, it's all out there as far as possibilities and how it'll affect their fantasy outlook. But for the most part, well, yeah, there's definitely successes with similar capital and profiles. Odds are that, a number of these guys aren't going to go on to do anything in the NFL and for fantasy. That's just the way it works. So hopefully when we go through our rankings next week, we can kind of identify the ones that have the best and worst chances of becoming fantasy starters for us. But I'm with you. I think they're all kind of worth taking a shot on because of those possibilities. And then that'll obviously become even more important after the draft and once landing spots are settled here. So that's kind of the intro to running backs. Like I said, we'll get into running backs in more detail next week when we do our running back rankings episode. And we'll get into the other positions here in just a second. But first, I want to let you know that the new year is a great time to reevaluate your financial goals, not just for yourself, but for your kids. Now is the perfect time to make sure your kids are on a path toward a solid financial future. A kid's investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life is a quick and simple to set up and lets you invest in their future now for education, big milestones, and more. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kid's investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Kids can't invest when they're minors, but a kid's investment account allows you to invest on their behalf now, giving their investments more time to grow. It's all online, and setting up an account could take you just 5 minutes. Then you can manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. Funds can be used for nearly anything, benefiting your child from tuition and tutors to music classes. And when they're adults and out on their own, they can use the funds for anything they need. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy. MEET fabric.com/fantasy. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, wide receiver time now, Nate. We have 5 consensus first round wide receivers. That is if you include Travis Hunter to the mix, but if not, there are 4 key names to know, and they make up our first tier. So it's Tetro McMillan of Arizona, Emeka Egbuka of Ohio State, Luther Burden III of Mizzou, and Matthew Golden out of Texas. So Nate, again, we'll talk about Travis Hunter in a bit, but this is the top 4 kind of true wide receivers for this year's class, according to the consensus boards, led by Tet McMillan for now, because there's been some debate stirring up whether he'll be the first wide receiver drafted. So how are you feeling about these round 1 options right now?
Not feeling all that great about them. Definitely not as strong of a wide receiver class as we saw last year. There's no Marvin Harrison Jr. in this class. There's no Malik Neighbors in this class. So definitely not just not having the high end talent, but also not having the depth at wide receiver either. We should see at least 2 of these guys go in the first round, but in general, I've seen them get lowered on big boards over time. I've also lowered them in my rankings over time. We saw Daniel Jeremiah recently do a mock draft. He had Golden at 12 to Dallas, McMillan at 22 to the Chargers, and then the other 2 weren't even first round picks. So it's not even a guarantee that we see all 4 of these guys in the first round, which isn't a great sign. Ibuka and Burden, more slot guys, potentially being able to play the Z role as well, but there's a lot of teams in the league that have slot receivers already, so there might not be as much of a need for their specific skill sets because there's been so many talented wide receiver classes in recent years. So most teams, you could argue, they could be set at their top 3 wide receiver spots this year. And because of that, there's only so many landing spots. And if they want to value one of these wide receivers versus a defensive player or someone at a different position, So it's possible we don't see these guys being all that valuable in fantasy. I think this year I've had McMillan in my top 20 or so wide receivers, probably going to continue to lower him as he's been lowered on big boards and lowered on mock drafts. The other three I have just outside of my top 30 wide receivers, since it's starting to get to a point there where you're just betting on upside, knowing that half of them probably aren't going to work out this year. The other half could have a very good year. So still in redraft leagues will consider drafting any of the four just because of that potential upside. But I think the lower that they're going on big boards, the more likelihood that there's going to be more misses in this group. And then in terms of dynasty drafts, probably right now all four first round picks. But if someone falls to the second round of the real life NFL draft, that might put them out of the first round of dynasty rookie drafts just because of how talented these running backs are. I think the running backs there's going to be more, not quite sure things, but more safer bets of guys who will have volume, where these wide receivers will need to earn their targets. And basically, every team has a clear number one wide receiver. There's a couple of exceptions in the league. And even then, most teams also have a number two wide receiver at this point. So it'll be harder for them to earn their targets when there's so many other good wide receivers in the league already as well.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's not as exciting of a group, but it's this first round guys, or at least potential first round guys here. Like it's kind of this good mix of, I think, options here among this group, where you have somebody like a Tet McMillan, like this big athletic outside wide receiver with like kind of explosive playmaking ability that can be a wide receiver one in the NFL. You have the Egbuka and Burdens who can kind of do it all and be these high floor wide receiver one, wide receiver two types in the NFL. And then you have Matthew Golden, who is almost like a pure projection to the league because of his speed and athleticism, but he kind of significantly lacks that ideal production profile that we're looking for from wide receiver prospects, which isn't the end of the world. We've seen guys succeed while lacking that ideal production. You don't have to look further than Brian Thomas Jr. last year. But for every one BTJ, there's also several others like A.D. Mitchell, Keon Coleman, and Xavier Legette, who are maybe more likely to take time to develop in the NFL, if at all. So there's maybe more risk there to someone like Golden, who might not pan out right away, and if at all, for the NFL and for fantasy. But it's definitely an intriguing group, and with Golden a high upside projection, at least from an NFL standpoint. So I'll be interested to see where he goes and where this group goes, because like you said, it's been changing quite a bit here as we get closer to the draft, and even who the number one wide receiver is going to be has changed quite a bit as well. So interesting group, and probably the most interesting name of the entire bunch is our next guy here. And as we head into kind of tier two of our wide receivers, which is another tier with just one name, and that one name is Travis Hunter out of Colorado. Probably one of the most unique and intriguing prospects that we've seen in recent years in the NFL. He's listed as a cornerback here on PFF, though he's truly like a wide receiver cornerback hybrid, where the biggest question of this year's NFL draft, at least in my opinion, is just how much of that hybrid player will Travis Hunter actually be in the NFL, because without knowing that for sure, his range of outcomes for what he can be for fantasy, IDP included, varies so wildly that it makes it difficult to invest too heavily into him until we know for sure. But that could become clear depending on the team that drafts him, because there were different teams that said they view him more as a wide receiver, other teams that view him more as a corner. Hunter himself says he wants to play 100% of snaps on both sides of the ball, which, let's be honest, it's just not going to happen, though I do appreciate the enthusiasm. But what do you think, Nate? Hunter, super intriguing for fantasy because there's so many question marks and so many different paths that they can lead to. But you've done your initial rankings already. So what was your thought process for Hunter at this point in the pre-draft process?
Yeah, at some point we need to do a full episode on him. And now that I'm saying it on the podcast, that means that we'll make it happen, because I think it's really interesting what the possibilities are and what that could mean for fantasy leagues in general, and what fantasy leagues will need to think of before even starting your league because of Hunter. But he is the top player on our big board, third on consensus big boards. Originally, a month or so ago, I was not including him in my rankings because I think the general thought process is, yeah, he wants to play 100% of both. But more likely he's going to play more of a part-time role of both, and it'll be easier to be a full-time cornerback and a part-time wide receiver than the other way around, because you can just learn a package of plays at wide receiver, or for that week know that game plan of these are the plays I have to learn, and then focus the rest of the time at cornerback, versus you can't really be a full-time wide receiver and only a part-time cornerback, because you still need to learn all of the defensive plays. You still need to scout all of the receivers on offense and all that kind of stuff. So you still, regardless, need to treat cornerback as a full-time job, and wide receiver, you can just have that package of plays. But at the combine, he was very adamant that he wants to play both wide receiver and cornerback. We did see Andrew Berry of the Browns say they view him as a wide receiver first, which kind of opened my eyes to the possibility that there could be some of these teams that view him as a wide receiver. And the more that I think about it, like I recently added him to my rankings, both in Dynasty and Redraft, and even prepping for this today, I'm like, I'm not high enough on him, because if you look at the teams he's getting mocked to the most, it's typically the second, third, or fourth pick, either to the Browns at 2, Giants at 3, or Patriots at 4. If you look at the Browns, like I just said, they view him as a wide receiver first, in which case he'd be the top wide receiver in this group. I think if he goes to the Browns, I think I would have him number 1 over all of the other wide receivers. Maybe one of them lands on a really good landing spot, and that makes me reconsider. But considering the Browns said they view him as a wide receiver first, that's pretty big. If he goes to the Giants at 3, I think the Giants have more of a need at cornerback. Yeah, Neighbors and Hunter together could work, but I don't think that's the most ideal pairing of wide receivers in terms of a little bit of overlapping skill sets. But I think the Giants have more of a need at cornerback, and I think they would view him as a cornerback first. So would not be as high on him if he ends up with the Giants. But then going to the Patriots fourth, they just invested a ton of money at cornerback this offseason. They paid the highest cornerback ever in the league history, and they have yet to address the wide receiver position, even though they've wanted to. They have not been able to. So they have a clear need at wide receiver. I would not be at all surprised if he goes to the Patriots that he would be considered a wide receiver first and a cornerback second. So that's 2 of the 3 most likely landing spots where I think he would be more of a wide receiver than a cornerback to start with. And if he's a full-time wide receiver, he's the best wide receiver in this class. And going on a team that needs a wide receiver, Cleveland has Jerry Jeudy as their top wide receiver right now, but I think Hunter would be able to be the number 1 on that team. The Patriots don't have a clear number 1 wide receiver. Demario Douglas is the closest thing they have to a number 1 wide receiver. So I think he would have the most targets from this group. He would be the biggest part of the offense if he goes to either one of those teams. Always a chance another team trades up and gets him, in which case that could depend if he's wide receiver or cornerback. But right now it's a gamble, but I think he has the biggest opportunity to be the best wide receiver in the class, even though there's a lot more likelihood that he could be a bust in terms of wide receiver production if he ends up as more of a full-time cornerback, only playing 50% of snaps or less at wide receiver, in which case you probably can't start him. You could probably only take chances on him in best ball or DFS.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's risk involved for sure. Like I do think, the most likely outcome is that he gets work as both a wide receiver and cornerback in the NFL. Like that's a big part of his allure and being such a high pick. He just having that dynamic weapon on both sides of the ball would be huge. But yeah, I'm with you. It's not going to be full time on both sides. You mentioned, just from a preparation standpoint, and as an NFL team, they're just not going to do that. Like they'll want to keep him fresh as well and at his best. And I think the way you utilize him is with certain packages, either on offense or on defense. If it's more of a corner heavy role, obviously, it's going to depend on the team. That probably benefits, IDP fantasy leagues more so than offense only. But if it is a more wide receiver heavy role, I'm with you. I think there's a lot more intrigue in him being a higher drafted prospect in our rookie drafts. I mean, you look at him. We'll talk more about him when we talk wide receivers, but I'm obviously super intrigued because he did excel at both offense and defense in college. Like this guy posted a 90.3 coverage grade last year on 400 coverage snaps and an 89.0 receiving grade on over 500 routes. Like those are stupid numbers that make no sense how it's possible, but that's how good he is. And honestly, it gives me hope that maybe his role on both offense and defense is maybe larger than we can imagine. And if that's possible, then I mean, I want in on that it for fantasy purposes, especially in IDP leagues. But I mean, for even just the potential of him getting more wide receiver work, I think I'm with you. There's always the chance that he can be the top wide receiver in this class as well, if given that opportunity. It's just, yeah, he comes with a risk, because if you're drafting him as a wide receiver, and he's only getting 50% or less of snaps there, then he's not going to pan out the way that we're investing in him. So there's all kinds of possibilities here, but yeah, like you said, we'll probably get into it more as we get closer to the draft.
I'll just add it's going to be ridiculous how valuable it is when they call him on the draft and they're like Travis Hunter, wide receiver, or Travis Hunter, cornerback, because the teams decide what
Yeah,
position they're announced at. Every so often you see like intriguing things of, well, like, oh, they called him an outside linebacker instead of a
right.
defensive end, or oh, they called him a guard instead of a tackle. Those kind of things have happened and they just haven't been all that fantasy relevant, but they're still interesting. But once it happens on draft day, whatever they call him, that could skyrocket him up rankings. It could take him all the way off rankings just based on what he's called on draft day.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and we'll see how like these fantasy platforms adjust as well, like how they designate him and what kind of flexibility they give him with his designations as well, because that plays a huge part in whether we can even utilize him as a fantasy asset, especially for yeah, IDP leagues, and potentially even for offense as well. So okay, final tier of wide receivers for today. We're looking at the guys outside of the first round, most likely, who will draw fantasy interest for us. This includes Trey Harris of Ole Miss, Alec Iomanor of Stanford, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel of Iowa State, Jalen Royals of Utah State, Isaiah Bond of Texas, and Xavier Restrepo of Miami. All these guys have a good shot of having their names called on day 2 of the draft, Nate, where there are plenty of fantasy relevant options who have fallen past the first round. So definitely some names that we need to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, I think for this group, it'll matter more than any other group where they end up on draft day, because I have not seen any kind of consensus of what order these guys should be ranked in. I've seen it kind of all over the place. So it's hard to tell which ones will be second round guys, which one will be third round guys. All ranked roughly 50 to 90 on consensus big boards, roughly where we have them. But really, like, if you look at the second and third round wide receivers in recent drafts, there haven't been a ton of hits. We had Lad McConkey work out last year at pick 34, but Keon Coleman, Jalen Polk, Donnie Mitchell really didn't do much. Third round last year was Corley, Jermaine Burton, Roman Wilson, Jalen McMillan as the one guy who worked out a little bit late in the year with his touchdowns, and then Luke McCaffrey, but really not a lot. Year before it was Jonathan Mingo, Jaden Reed, Rashee Rice, and Marvin Mims on the second round. Probably the best group that I'll be mentioning here, with just Jaden Reed and Rashee Rice. But then third round, Jalen Hyatt didn't do a ton. Cedric Tillman did some this year, but not so much as rookie year. Josh Downs put up some numbers, but not quite enough to start him. Same with Michael Wilson. Trey Tucker wasn't startable in fantasy. And then even the year before, just listing the names: Christian Watson, Wan'Dale Robinson, John Mechie, Tyquan Thornton, George Pickens, Alec Pierce, and Sky Moore. And then third round, Velus Jones, Jalen Tolbert, David Bell, and Danny Gray. So there are a bit more misses than there are hits, at least in terms of potential fantasy production. So I think, yeah, there should be two or three guys from this group who end up having fantasy value. We'll probably be drafting more of them late rounds in fantasy drafts, but no one that I'm getting all that excited about now, because I don't know which ones will be drafted in the second round. It could be guys that we talked about in that first tier that are the first guys drafted in the second round. So right now, I'm not getting all that excited for the group. I think if a team values one of them high enough to draft them early, mid, second round, then I might start getting a little more excited. But based on where we have them in the big boards, they're probably more late second round and third round guys. So it's throwing darts, from my opinion, and only one or two out of the 5 or 6 will hit. And that's kind of the same success rate that we were seeing in the third tier running backs that'll be drafted in the fourth or fifth or potentially even sixth round of the draft. So for that reason, I'm not super excited about them yet. But I think if a team values them, then I'll get more excited because that team is valuing them.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly where I have them. I have them kind of the fringe round two, round three dynasty rookie picks as well, especially once like you mentioned before with the running backs, mixing those in there, and then tight ends as well. So yeah, it's not the end of the world. Like there's hope for any drafters who maybe don't have like first or second round rookie picks this year. You could potentially get a solid wide receiver prospect or running back prospect as well. It's definitely going to be the case once you mix in IDPs in there and stuff in those leagues, but yeah, still a lot of relevant names that could fit in as values. I think in rookie drafts, depending on where that landing spots end up being, and like you said, how teams value them, they have a shot to kind of climb up depth charts in the fall and beyond that as well. So yeah, not nearly as exciting. Obviously, we started off that way, kind of with the wide receiver class, so it's obvious that the guys going in the later rounds maybe not as appealing as some of the other position groups like running back, for example. But still some hope in there that we'll talk about when we start talking receivers and things like that in rankings. All right, last position now, the tight ends, which has been one of the more exciting positions to cover in recent years because of the high end talent to emerge here. And with these rookies even giving us tight end one overall finishes in back to back years with Brock Bowers last year and Sam Laporta in 2023. And this year, we have a few more candidates to add to the mix, including Tyler Warren out of Penn State and Colston Loveland of Michigan, both projected day one picks here in 2025. So, Nate, what do you think? Will history repeat itself with our rookie tight ends this season?
I don't think they will be the number one overall tight end. I don't think either of them are quite the receiver that Brock Bowers was. So I think Brock Bowers should remain the top tight end, but I have both of these guys in my top 12 in redraft right now. Part of that is the talent that these guys have, but part of it is also just the state of the tight end position right now, with older guys not playing quite as well or more guys playing in a rotation. I think Tyler Warren, both of these guys are projected to be like top 24, top 25 picks in the first round. Warren, I think, is probably the safest one right now from a fantasy perspective because I think because he can play everything at tight end. He has experience in line. He has experience in the backfield. I think he is much more likely to be an every down tight end. So I think I'm not as concerned about what team he lands up on, even though it might not be the best team in the world. I think he's going to see enough volume that regardless of who his quarterback is, who the other receiving options are, he should see a lot of volume on offense because of his talent. And especially in PPR leagues, I view him similarly to a guy like Trey McBride, who, yeah, he doesn't have a ton of huge plays at tight end. He's not scoring a lot of touchdowns, but he's just catching so many of those passes, getting first downs, getting that 1 point for PPR plus all those yards, and just doing that over and over and over. I wouldn't be surprised if Warren can do that. Loveland, a little bit more concerned about what his role is exactly, if he's only playing on passing downs, what offense he lands up in. So for me, I could see Loveland moving up or down a little bit depending on the landing spot. But he also, just looking at any of the numbers, has that same talent as a lot of the other tight ends that we have viewed in recent years of being potential tight end ones, potential top five tight ends. I think Loveland also has that potential to be a top five player. And when you're drafting and redraft leagues, I'm perfectly happy to pick Loveland and then pick a safer guy like a Tucker Kraft, Pat Fryermuth, someone that I know I can put in my fantasy starting lineup if Loveland isn't working out quite yet. But I think that'll be a perfectly fine strategy in redraft. And then in dynasty leagues, I think both of them will end up as first round guys, regardless of what teams they land on, assuming they get drafted mid, late first round, like we expect.
Yeah, it definitely seems that that's where they're trending, right? It seems like they're going to be first round picks here. And if you look at first round tight end picks the past few years, dating back to 2018, we have 6 that have gone in the first round in the NFL draft: Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson, Brock Bowers, obviously, Noah Fant, Hayden Hurst, and Dalton Kincaid. All of them except for Noah Fant has become a top 12 PPR tight end at least once, though, Fant probably shouldn't have been in that first round anyways in the first case. Like I think there's an argument there, but he didn't really have, because he didn't really have those encouraging metrics that all of these other first rounders have, except for Hayden Hurst. But Hurst did still at least get there once in his NFL career back in 2020. So the potential here is very good for both of these guys to kind of deliver weekly starting potential for fantasy and be those top 12 picks, like you said. And they have the college profiles to back that up. So I'm excited about both of them and what they could be in the NFL and for fantasy. And I think after 2 straight years of rookie tight end success, we've moved past the avoid rookie tight ends narrative in fantasy, which just adds to the hope for these two guys specifically. And yeah, looking at potential draft landing spots as well. The Indianapolis Colts could be interesting for a team that might need a tight end. And I've seen Colston Loveland draft or mocked to the Los Angeles Chargers quite a bit, just with the Michigan connection there with Jim Harbaugh as well. And they could be another one of those teams that's in need of another receiving option, right? So there's some interesting potential here for these high end options. And I'm with you. I think they can be first round picks in our dynasty rookie drafts as well. There are also three other tight ends who might all be second round picks this year, at the very least, day two, because it's a really strong tight end draft this year, thanks to guys like Harold Fannin Jr. of Bowling Green, Elijah Arroyo of Miami, and Mason Taylor of LSU. Nate, we don't typically get more than two fantasy tight end ones out of a single draft class, but the 2025 class is at the very least increasing their chances of that happening with these three additional names to add to Warren and Loveland. So what are your thoughts on them heading into the NFL draft?
Yeah, I think all three of them decently interesting names. There's reason that you can talk yourself into of how they can be one of the better tight ends in the NFL at some point of time, but also a chance that they aren't there. I think after going through yesterday, I spent all day with tight ends and thinking about it more. I think probably at least two of these three guys might end up being backups their first year. Looking at mock drafts, we see a lot of like going to Kansas City, going to Philadelphia, teams that might not necessarily need a tight end for this year, but just need a tight end of the future. So there's that possibility that they have to sit a year or two and wait. And for some of them, that might be the best thing for them because they're relatively young tight ends. Some of them don't have as much experience against stronger opponents or because of injury or whatever reason. So we've seen that with this tight end group. But there's also the possibility that they land on a team that are more so in need of a tight end now. A team like the Jets, who could get Tyler Warren in the first round, but if they don't get Warren in the first round, definitely have a need at tight end. So I could see that being an opportunity for a tight end. Chargers, like you said as well, a lot of mocks have Loveland going there, but if he doesn't, they could still use a receiving tight end this year. So there are a couple landing spots where I could see these tight ends having a decent amount of value this year. And when you're looking at sleeper tight ends, for example, there are not a lot of guys that you can probably consider sleeper tight ends heading into the season because barely anything changed in the tight end landscape this free agency. Almost everyone just re-signed their guys. Brenton Strange is the closest thing that we have to a sleeper because he was a backup slash starter at times last year, and this year will be the lead receiving tight end. But outside of that, the movement has been incredibly minimal. So when you're trying to take those late dart throws at tight end in redraft leagues, there's a chance that one or two of these guys will be some of the top sleeper contenders because, yeah, it's more likely they don't work out, but they could work out. And because of that, also in dynasty leagues, probably not going to be first round guys unless we see one of these players get drafted early in the second round in a situation where they're starting right away. But I think definitely some round two value in terms of dynasty rookie drafts.
Yeah, there's potential here, right? Like you said, all these guys kind of have a shot to be second round picks in the NFL draft, and you know, I don't know. Looking at this class, like I get that, for NFL purposes, like as a tight end, you have to be able to do more than contribute just as a receiver. But still surprising to me that like Fannin Jr. is the lowest projected pick of these three, considering the insane production that he put together in college. Like regardless of it happening in the group of five at Bowling Green, whatever, that production is unlike anything we've ever seen from the tight end position. 1,555 receiving yards in 2024. That led the entire FBS, not just tight ends, but wide receivers included. He had 10 touchdowns, posted a 96.4 receiving grade. Like, is he an incredible athlete like the NFL loves so much? No, it doesn't seem that that's the case, but I don't know. I'm sure that hurts his projection like to the next level, but his production numbers are like truly historical for the position. Position, and I think that's worth kind of betting on for the position in the second round if you're a team looking at a tight end. And I think about some of the potential landing spots for him where he could be a receiving option. And I get pretty excited about Harold Fannin Jr. I mean, we'll talk about more about him in a couple weeks, but I feel like there's a lot of potential to capitalize on there. So yeah, it's just an intriguing class altogether, especially with the tight ends now a little bit deeper this year.
I mean, if you're going to talk about Fannin now, I want to give away my good
There
Fannin
you go.
stat
Go
of
for
that.
it.
Two of the top three games against Power 4 defenses last year in terms of tight end receiving yards were him. In his two games that he played a Power 4 defense, he had over 100 yards against, I think, Penn State and Texas A&M. Both games that were one score a game, so it wasn't just like fourth quarter him playing against backups and racking up a bunch of yards. He had 100 yards by the third quarter in both of those games against Power 4 defenses. So even though he had a bunch of yards against all those other defenses as well, he did do well when he had the opportunity to play against a good defense.
Yeah, he's been incredibly productive and efficient too. Like he's not just, this compiler. Like 3.76 yards per route run is just an insane mark for a season. That is 100th percentile for prospects dating back to 2018. And then like his career 2.99 yards per route run is 99th percentile. So it's just insane production. Like I just feel like there has to be something worth betting on there if you're an NFL team in the second round as a receiving threat. Even if you feel like he's not going to be a contributor in year one, like I just like the potential there so much. But yeah, we'll get into these guys, a little bit more. But that's going to wrap us up for this week. Kind of a little teaser or intro to the incoming rookie class, since it's going to be all rookie content all the time from now until the draft, and probably a little bit after as well. So we'll get right back into that next week. And actually, if you're in an IDP listener of the show, we'll have our full rookie linebacker preview for IDP as well, recording that tonight for a Thursday release. So be on the lookout for that. But thank you all for tuning into this episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and or leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help support the show. I'd greatly appreciate that. Nate, thanks for running through this with me. I feel like that was a good teaser, but now I'm looking forward to the positional rankings, which we'll get into here over the next couple weeks, starting with the running backs next week. But in the meantime, let everybody know what you have going on at pff.com this week.
Oh, yeah. So closed out free agency with a little winners and losers article from last week. This week started with an updated PPR rankings based on everything that happened in free agency, as well as changes with how we view some of these rookies. Going into next week, as well as future weeks, especially starting in April, we'll start having player profiles on these rookies. Right now, have 22 of them planned for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. If they are doing well enough leading up to the draft, we'll do more of them, but we'll see how the articles do, and then we'll have more of the player profiles after they are drafted as well. And then we'll continue get updated dynasty rankings, dynasty rookie rankings. Want to get some dynasty superflex rankings out there as well as dynasty trade value charts if you're trying to get some trades in before the NFL draft happens.
Nice. Yeah, that'll be fun stuff. As for me, I'll be releasing my personal prospect models for several positions over the next 2 weeks. That started with the edge position for IDP today, linebackers tomorrow, running backs on Friday. That'll include comparables and hit rates, as well as individual profiles for the top names. So be sure to check that out as well. But for this week, that's a wrap. Buckle up for draft season, and until next time, peace out.